The El Chapo trial resumes today after a 2-week-long holiday recess, but the judge has already ruled on several key issues. The jury last heard about the Sinaloa cartel's expansive artillery, including AK-47s and grenade launchers. But the judge decided the jury will not be hearing more about the claims the cartel had a secret deal with the DEA.
So CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman joins us now. So Rikki, it's been a couple of weeks. People may have forgotten, where we are in this case. So give us some of the highlights. Give us a brief recap, if you will.
What the prosecution has done is really does this case like a symphony. So you have lots of highs, no pun intended, from all of the cooperating witnesses who are people who worked or claim to have worked directly with or for El Chapo. So we have learned about the amount of drugs. We have learned about the means that the drugs were smuggled, whether it was by boat or whether it was by plane or whether it was by train and even a submarine. And we've learned about how much of these drugs got into the United States of America. Prosecution had said there was enough for a line of cocaine for every person in the USA.
Wow.
And we certainly have also learned how they were distributed. I do think that one of the highlights came at the very end of testimony before the holiday recess, which was of one of two twins, the Flores brothers, who come out of Chicago. And they decided, at great risk to themselves and their families, in 2008 that they were going to cooperate with the federal government, probably for fear of the fact that they would be killed or be in prison for the rest of their lives. And they were the chief distributors for El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel, according to their testimony. Because why? As they say, we're from Chicago. Chicago is in the middle of everywhere. So it could come into Chicago and the drugs could go out as far as New York, as simple as Milwaukee, and then to the west. And the Flores brothers tell a really deadly story of how El Chapo allegedly worked. And one of the Flores brothers who testified had a recording where we finally hear El Chapo actually trying to nickel and dime about a drug deal.
So what does this mean for both the prosecution and the defense?
Well, I think what you have is the prosecution wins this big motion that you had alluded to in your introduction. And what happens with the prosecution now is they say, we won. We are not going to show, we're not going to let the defense show that there was any corruption that involved the United States government and the DEA, and that the whole idea of Fast and Furious, which people may remember, which had to do with an ATF scandal about guns going into Mexico and where did they wind up? Some of them wound up with the Sinaloa drug cartel. Huge win for the prosecution, huge loss for the defense, because the defense really wants to show that this is a show trial, that this corruption continues. And for that, I brought you a little gift. You know I'm in love with this book, Cartel. You know I'm in love with it. I don't know the author. I don't get a percentage. But I got to say, I almost wept when it was over because I didn't want to leave this world. And on his very last page, what he says in part is, people don't run the cartel. The cartel runs people. And what he talked about was even when the big guy was taken out, and it's just like here, El Chapo is now missing. Banking, real estate, energy, politics, armaments, walls, fences, cops, courts, and prison. The cartel carries on.
And that's probably, like you said, what the defense is going to argue. He's been in prison this long and the cartel keeps rolling on. What about the prosecution? We've talked a little bit about, jurors falling asleep. This has been sort of a plotting kind of a thing where we see one bad guy after another bad guy telling sort of these stories.
Interrupted by an agent who gives some facts, then another bad guy, then it goes, that's like I say, it's like a symphony. Up to informant, down to an agent.
Could we see the prosecution maybe changing their strategy in light of, maybe the jurors can't consume all of this stuff and figure out what's important, what's not?
Well, I think that it's a valid comment. So did the prosecution have some meetings over the holiday recess, and did they make a decision or not? That are you wedded to your strategy that you're going to do this for 4 months, no matter what, and you are not going to change it up? Or did they say, we don't want to take the chance of losing this jury along the way? The problem for the defense, not the prosecution, is that no matter how long this prosecution goes, they have mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence. One thing to keep in mind, and I'll leave it at that, is that sometimes if you have too much evidence, the jury just is glassy-eyed. They've just heard too much. And if the defense can get it across that the cartel is rolling along, then do they convict El Chapo of the top count? That he was the leader instead of just a participant.
Yeah, it sounds like they're building a case to indicate he's a bad guy.
We know that.
But,
but it's a big difference between being the leader of the pack or, in this case, the head of a criminal enterprise.
Exactly. Rikki, thank you.
Thanks, Rikki.